Victoria Cobb, president of the Family Foundation, here with Dr. Todd Gackey, our vice president of government relations, and Grant May, our newest addition to the team in our policy department. And we thought we'd give a little precursor, a little chat about the upcoming session for folks that are going to start tuning in to what's going on with our government. So glad to be here. We've got Todd, who's got about this will be his sixth session officially lobbying for the Family Foundation. And Grant will be brand new. And I will admit...
How many?
25.
Wow.
25. This will be my 25th. Is that like a golden or I feel like there should be like an anniversary.
Yeah, and
that
you should get an award for that.
Yeah, no.
I should just get legislation passed. That's what I really want. I don't really need an award. I just want the good stuff passed and the bad stuff.
You no longer have to register. You should just just go in. Yeah.
It's funny because I remember when I first started and they'd put these veteran lobbyists in front of me and they'd been doing it and people would reference like 20 years ago and I'm like, oh my gosh, these people have been doing this for decades.
Yeah.
You are the veteran lobbyist now.
Yeah. I do a lot less of it, but yes, I have been around a little bit.
We call you in for special moments, where we need the big name to come in. So.
The ringer.
Yeah.
One of our previous teammates used to call it the Victoria Eye. Like I'd kind of go in and give them like the side eye, like do what I need you to do right now to the legislators. But no, anyway. But we should probably explain like what is it we actually do during session. Lobbying carries a little bit of a connotation with it.
Sure, yeah. And we've talked about this meme, about where people think, well, maybe it's handing out money or playing golf or going to these fine dining restaurants. And it's really none of that. It's usually sitting in committees all day, going to their office and talking, but it's much more mundane than that. So
it's like watching grass grow some days. You're just literally sitting in a committee listening to very boring stuff until your
and you
got
to do it because that might be the only place you get to see a legislator because they're going in and out of committee meetings all day long.
Correct. Now, Grant, I know you've taught some Teen PAC sessions. So Teen PAC is sort of a civics engagement thing for our younger folks. Yeah. So you've kind of taught about lobbying.
I did, but I've never lobbied before. But when I was teaching about lobbying, I actually had this inherent bias against it. And I would teach the students, this was not in the guide, but I would teach them that lobbyists were basically glorified used car salesmen. So that's a little bit of a divine justice that now I am the glorified used car salesman.
Okay. I'm not surprised. That image was not part of the meme that I think we'll have to put this up on the screen so people can see this meme about what people. Now we need to add used car salesmen into the. Maybe that's fair, but
there are some salesmen out there that will sell some lemons to make a buck. So there could be some truth to that. I don't know. I kind of feel like we're imparting some wisdom here to Grant here. With your 25 years and my 6 years, and we have staff that's been doing it for a few years, and now it's sort of like we're imparting wisdom to Grant.
I want to hear just some of the favorite memories, or if there were crazy moments that happened over at the General Assembly. I'm sure y'all have some stories to tell.
Wow.
You want to go first?
Yeah. All right. So I guess mine would have to be when I first started working, very first session. And somehow I became the gambling guy. So we oppose all gambling, and there's this big gambling committee meeting right out of the gate, and I drew the short straw, and I go up there. And I've been in front of committees before from other work, employment areas, but I go up there, and this room was packed with like 200 gambling.
That's because the gambling interests hire every single firm in town. Okay.
And they had all kinds of people going up there and speaking in favor of it, and it was me and maybe two others. And I just remember looking, y'all took a still shot of it when I was speaking at the podium, and I looked in the back, and every single one of them were looking at me so mean. I thought they were going to drag me outside and beat me up. I mean, so for me, it's the very first committee meeting where I gave a really big public comment. And so for me, that was it right there. That was baptism by fire.
Wow.
It reminds me. So one of my legendary moments was very early on. We had the Senate Education and Health Committee was controlled by Republicans, but not ones that had any interest in doing any social issues. So it's a very different era than it is today in terms of what the parties were like and what they cared about and all that. But they definitely did not want to touch any of our bills. And so every bill was blocked in this committee, and they actually called it the Committee of Death, which was ironic because we were always trying to pass these pro-life bills. But anyway, and the chairman was this long-time sitting senator, and he had a terrible, he blocked everything. He killed everything. And so and maybe this was a little bit bold of us, but we basically took out a newspaper ad in his local newspaper with his voting record, just because we felt like people needed to know that here was this guy who's supposed to be on the generally like on the team of pro-lifers, and he was not. So anyway, so of course then, I mean, you kind of get what you get when you do that. So then I had to go testify in front of his committee on a life bill, and it was shortly after that, and let's just put it this way. His treatment of me was so bad that I go into the restroom afterwards and the Planned Parenthood lobbyist walks up and she's like, I am so sorry. And I was like, dude, I have reached a new low where even our opponents who are very sympathetic to his position actually felt bad for me. So, there have been some good moments. Good / interesting.
That's quite a moment when the other side is coming to you. Have you ever had moments where you actually find yourself in agreement with someone on the opposite side and they call it out in a meeting?
Yeah, they think it's like so bizarre that they're like, wow, if these two sides agree.
Yeah, and they always start out with, we never agree on anything.
Right.
But on this issue, I agree with, and then they come in and talk about where we find agreement on a certain issue. That's always kind of shocking. I often wonder when they go back behind closed doors, are they getting some fingers pointed at them? Don't agree with them. Don't side with them. But
yeah, I mean, it's ideal actually if you can get along, because as lobbyists, we are down there for hours and hours and hours on end with mostly people who don't agree on our positions, I would say, mostly lobbyists that don't. And so it is actually great if you can build relationships and people can get past the fact that you're on two different sides, because you're going to be there hanging out with them day in and day out anyway. So you might as well, kind of try to. It used to be a little easier than it is because people take themselves much more seriously and a little less.
Every once in a while, you will find yourself in a friendly conversation with someone. Yeah. And it is kind of refreshing. It's like, okay, see, we're not these big, bad people that you present, say that we are. We're actually humans. We're nice.
Yes.
We can get along with everyone.
Yes, for sure. Well, I thought we should also talk a little bit about just context of session, right? So every session doesn't happen in a bubble, meaning you don't go in as if nothing has happened before or after. It fits into, and there's always kind of a narrative around every session, and you don't know what that is. You don't know how that unfolds until you're kind of there. But I thought maybe just talk a little bit, maybe Todd tells a little bit about just thoughts you have about like how this session will be framed or what is going on around it that would affect the way things go down.
Well, I think for starters, you got to look at it in the context. We have an election that's coming up, in the fall. So everything's going to be geared towards impacting that election, whether you're trying to get someone on record to take a vote that they don't want to have to take a vote on, or you're trying to push a bill that will satisfy the interest of your constituents or your base. And so I think there's a lot of unknowns on this, because then you, at the same time, like you said, you look back to last year where the governor vetoed a lot of bad bills. He signed into law some bills as well. But you have to look at it in the context that, they tried to get some things through last year. The governor vetoed them. Do they bring them back again?
Right.
What are they going to do to try and help their election causes going forward? I think there's a lot of unknowns this year. We hear rumors that maybe they won't push a whole lot of controversial bills.
Yeah.
Which may or may not be a bad thing.
We've heard that before, and it doesn't always shape out. So, Grant, we call these brochure bills, where really the only purpose is I have an election coming up, so I want something on the front of. Now, a brochure is sort of an outdated term because I doubt there's any legislator that actually has a brochure anymore. But they call them brochure bills, and so it'll be interesting to see how many bills are introduced purely for the fact that we want to say, as a legislator, when I go to run in the fall, like, I put this forward. But then you also have it's the governor's last year in office. So the question a little bit is like, is he still aiming for a certain legacy, and what is that, and how does he shape the interactions in order to go towards that? And I do think, you made the point about the national election. I do think there's sort of this, there's some takeaways from the national election. I don't know how that will translate, but I do think there was some chastisement of DEI and transgender stuff, and I'd love to see that play out.
Right.
Well, and obviously I'm the rookie here, so this is my first time going through it, but it feels like it's almost like two prize fighters, slowly sizing each other up because they've been really slow with bills coming out this year. We haven't seen what the other side's pushing. We haven't really seen too much of what our side's pushing, and so it feels like we're just waiting who's going to throw the first punch out there.
Yeah, that's
it
a good
is the
point.
slowest, yes. For those of you that aren't in the minutia, bills get drafted, they go through legislative services who kind of cleans them up, and then they show up in the system, and our team then starts our evaluation. We look at typically about 3,000 bills,
somewhere around
and
there.
we're going through them to figure out what impacts the family. Obviously, some of them are ones that Todd has actually crafted and put together and given to legislators or asked them to carry. So some of them we know are coming, but then there's sort of the whole other side of what are they bringing, and it's just been way later than ever before, and so you're kind of getting them all at once. So we certainly haven't gone through all 3,000 bills at this point and have a long way to go to see, really, are people going to put in these, sort of like, I want to move the mountain bills, or are we all going to like do these little let me just clean this up around the edges and see if that works.
And usually you kind of get a feeling for what session is going to look like based on what the bills are that are being introduced early. We don't have a whole lot to go on.
Right.
So that's why we can't really predict what this session is going to look like. Too many unknowns. But everyone's been commenting about how the bills are just kind of slowly coming in, which means there's going to be a huge dump of bills that first week of session.
It does. It does make for a sort of a rough start. And unlike other sessions, we do know there are 3 bills that went through committee. So, there's this tricky thing where you can continue a bill from last session to this session. We're sort of a biannual legislature in the way that you can do that. And they move these. So we do have some amendments that are on abortion and marriage. So we know there's some hot ticket items that actually are already through a committee. So that will also be interesting because it's like everything else is slow. And then there's these 3 that are actually on a fast track. So I think that'll make it shape up.
So let me ask y'all this. It feels right now, because Democrats have a razor-thin majority in both chambers, and it feels like the two sides are pretty ensconced in what they believe. Is this new, or has there been more bipartisanship in previous years?
Well, I can say because
you have the 25 years.
I have a crazy amount of history here. That I can say that there used to be much. I think, and I would almost guarantee that stats would bear this out. There used to be more bipartisan bills passed. So there used to be things a lot more that had both sides on it. At least, obviously we've always focused on the issues of life and marriage and all those. And so of course those are always going to be divided to some degree by party. But we used to have pro-life Democrats that would, and they're still in the general public, those people still exist, but getting elected through their party is almost impossible because you have to win a primary. And so every time someone, steps forward, then you've got Planned Parenthood and the other base interests like fighting this candidate. And so you end up without being able to get people into office that actually do carry those common sense views. So I would argue it is much more divided, partisan, whatever words you want to use. It is much harder to get bills if you've got one party controlling the legislature and a different governor. That's just kind of a recipe for a lot of jam.
Yeah, just trying to get out of committee alone is difficult. So when you have the majority, you can use that committee and it can stop any good pro-family, pro-life bill. It can stop right there in Senate Education and Health. There is an ideological divide right now that is just so clear. And it comes down to like a worldview. And when we look at it, it's everyone has a worldview that they operate off of. And for us as Christians, we look at it through the biblical lens, and that guides us in how we approach public policy, society, and things like that. And there is a segment of legislators that are driven by a worldview that is not governed by their spirituality, their biblical lens. And so they view everything through a political public policy lens and how that drives them and what their legislation they're introducing. And you see that really clear. One example I'll give is there was a bill last year. In fact, I think a lot of people, we talked about it quite a bit. It was a bill that would have provided kind of a study for maternal health. It was otherwise a fair bill.
Should be bipartisan.
Should be bipartisan.
Okay.
But they included language, instead of saying mothers, they said birthing people. And that is a clear, and this bill was brought by Chanel Herring, who's the majority leader in the House. And it was a clear kind of slap at this, mothers, this what we would consider traditional values. And it was a injection of this worldview that we're going to eradicate any of that thinking. And so they put in place birthing people.
And my recollection is the governor vetoed that language, and they were so wed to it, they let the whole bill go.
That's right,
Which
yeah.
tells you the worldview
Wow.
is so significant because
Yeah.
the actual objective of the bill could have been bipartisan, but
Oh,
because
yeah.
they had to make it a worldview issue, they had to make it so extreme on one side
Mm-hmm.
that they actually lost a bill that could have actually been passed by both sides.
Wow, and not to pile on Delegate Herring, but she's the
Sometimes
author.
she's worthy of piling on
Yeah.
because she does say some things and do
Yeah.
some things. and-
Right. But I mean, her ideology is so far off what we used to see from legislators, even on the left side of the aisle in Virginia. She's the author of the abortion amendment, as we know. But when she was defending her abortion amendment, she was saying that we as politicians have decided we are going to determine how to treat a patient, and we're not even in the room with them. We don't do that with cancer. So she was out here comparing unborn lives to cancer, which to me is crazy. I mean, first off,
Yeah.
we actually do make laws that affect how doctors, do their practices.
Informed consent and other things
Yeah.
are very
Right,
governed.
right.
And I'm
Yeah.
also old enough to remember 4 years ago during COVID where all they wanted to do was get in the doctor's office
Sure,
and tell
yeah.
you what you can take, what you have to take, what you're not allowed to take, all those things. But then to be comparing unborn lives to cancer,
Yeah.
I mean, it just seems like the antithesis of the two, right?
Right. And that speaks to the worldview difference there. They're seeing this not as a human, not as a child in the womb worthy of life. They're seeing it and equating it to some other kind of medical disease. And that's...
I just wonder how women who desire being pregnant get excited when they're pregnant. I just wonder how they react to statements like that. I mean, it's hard because I'm so pro-life and I only see through things through that. But just an average woman who just I just the idea that we're treating pregnancy that way when the end product of a pregnancy is this beautiful child that enters your family. I have to think that people kind of go, okay, that's a really terrible analogy, but it does, I think to your point, it does indicate the difference of how we view life and a culture of life.
It also makes me wonder how anyone who's read any history or studied history can see a group comparing a marginalized group out here to a parasitic disease. I mean, when have the good guys ever compared a certain group of people to a parasite? I mean, they're never the good guys. And it's happened a lot throughout history. There's really nothing new under the sun. A lot of the things we like to fight at the Capitol, it feels like, there's this novel evil that we're having to fight. But a lot of these things have been around forever. And it was really Christianity and Christian values that was able to kick it to the curb, get it out of the mainstream. And now as Christianity is increasingly sidelined, it feels like we're seeing a lot of these sort of old pagan ideas come back into the public square.
Yeah. Let me ask this because I think it's important for people to understand. We go in there into this middle of this worldview clash, right? So there's this clash going on, and you can see it with all the debates about specifically life issues. You can see it a lot on parental rights issues. The idea that there's one group of people that understand that God has given that God has given parents the ultimate authority of their children, and then there's this other side that really does sort of view them as like the government's social experiment or whatever you might say. But so we see this play out. But let me ask this: I think we have to be clear to other folks. Like, why do we do what we do? Why do we enter into the middle of this clash? What is the motivation? Because I think we get ascribed a lot of motivations by the other side of why they think we're involved in this.
Right.
What would you say? What's your motivation, Ted?
Yeah, well, I would say that we're motivated by love for our fellow man. We want to go in there and extend our how we view policy as a way to improve family, to improve lives, improve children, and protect their innocence and their upbringing. And so we're doing it out of an act of love. It's not an act of, we're not doing it out of bigotry or hatred. It's out of love for the other person, to see them thrive and give them chances to grow, to have the freedoms to be able to make decisions that are good for their families. And we're called as Christians to do that. We want to share the truth and the grace. We want to share the truth, but it has to be with grace. Yeah. But we're called to be expressing our truth with love and grace, and we do it to the best that we can. Sometimes it's not easy. Yeah. And sometimes you have to sift through some of the wickedness in these committee meetings. I mean, when you're talking about things like assisted suicide, physician-assisted suicide, those are heavy topics. and it can look like you are not sensitive to the people who are suffering. But what we want to do is provide an alternative view to some of these policy issues. There are other ways to help these families, to help these individuals. And so I would say that our first approach or first reason for going out there and doing what we do is an act of love.
Mm-hmm.
And is this what motivated you to step into this?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny when you look at, going to an organization that often gets labeled as a group that is hateful, that is bigoted, and then you explain to your family members that maybe don't share your same worldview what you're doing now. I mean, the holidays are such an interesting time for that. They don't understand. And I love that you brought it back to love. And I think love is such, in the modern context, we have such a shallow interpretation of what truly is love. But when you take it back to the Bible, to our Christian worldview, you look at 1 Corinthians 13, specifically verse 6, where it talks about love does not delight in evil, but it rejoices with truth. And that's what we're out here trying to do. Love is not just supposed to be something that's kind and inoffensive. Love is something that protects. And so we want to be out here. We want to protect unborn children. We want to protect little kids from, these gender transition surgeries that are ruining their lives, and the physician-assisted suicide. So many of these issues were motivated out of love for the other people, and that so often gets misconstrued because we have such a shallow view of what love is today.
In fact, it would be unloving to not speak to these issues, to not share with them what the harms are going to be, to let them go down these paths that are going to be destructive to their families and to their children. If we didn't do that, that would be unloving. And we have a high responsibility to do that. And sometimes that means we're the only ones standing up in committee and speaking to these issues.
Right.
But we do it. And, Christ taught us, you're going to have to pick up your cross and follow after him. That's not an easy task.
No.
But we're called to do it.
And we have to remember, like I said earlier, there's nothing new under the sun. I mean, back in the ancient Roman Empire before the Christians, got into power and before Christianity was accepted, the Romans they had the custom where the wife would have the baby and then the father could choose to accept it, or they would go and leave it on the side of the road. And it was the Christians that cared for those babies, that took them in, that adopted them. And, history repeats itself. We are out here, we're the Christians trying to fight for these babies. And it's sad to see that, that old practice, that Roman practice has become renormalized once again.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. I mean, I got into this before I had children, and so very similarly motivated. But I have to say, I think those of us that are moms and dads in this have extra motivation knowing what your children, the world that your kids are growing up in, and what that could look like without intervention. If the government was left to its own demise, if the worldview of those that don't embrace Christianity actually sort of rules the day in our public policy. And so it is quite a motivation. I do think we need to wrap up this by talking about how people engage with us, because ultimately when we go into session and, when Todd sits down with a legislator, or Grant will this time, they care about the arguments that we're sharing, but they also care because they know we represent thousands and thousands of Virginians. And really they know that when Todd talks to them, there are all these people in their district that actually support the work of the Family Foundation, are going to pay attention to what we say about legislation. And so it's really actually, when you guys directly engage with legislators, that's even more effective than even what these guys do. Not to diminish what you guys are going to go in and do, because you do the hard stuff.
It's true.
But talking to your own legislator is so important. So I'm just going to list out a few ways that you guys can stay engaged as we kick off the session. The first one, of course, is getting our email alerts. This is so important simply because of the pace of session. Imagine 3,000 bills and 45 days, basically. So they're reading fast. Bills are moving fast. So for you to be effective, you have to know where in the process is this bill, and how does my legislator weigh into that? Are they on a committee? Is this at the full House or Senate floor? So sign up from our email alerts. Those are just go to our website, familyfoundation.org. You'll see the place to click up to enter our email list, so that you're getting just very, very regular, quick frequency information about the bills. But also, there's a fun feature that we now include, which is called Text to Watch. So you sign up on our Text to Watch list, and that allows, so when these hot button, we don't do it for every bill because you'd kind of lose your mind on how many texts. We try to pick the very, 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 very important bills.
Yeah.
And when they come up in committee, and I don't mean the day of or the committee started at 3 o'clock. I mean, the committee starts at 3 o'clock and 2 hours into it, the abortion bill finally shows up. At that moment, we will text out a link if you're on this list, and you can just, if you're available and you want to watch it, you can just click on and you're going to get the debate right at that moment and be able to watch what's going on because it is all streamed. This did not used to be the case. So we used to actually have to be there in person to know what went down, but now it is all streamed. And so you're able to actually see the actual conversations around these bills. So I think that's super important. And to do that, all you do is you text TFF to the number 77222. So TFF to 77222. So that's a way to get the sort of streaming in real time with the key bills. Then I would encourage people to follow us on our socials. So we now have, if you're a Facebook person, follow that. If you are Instagram, you're going to see little reels where Todd will jump out of committee and talk about whatever had just happened. Or on X, there's both the Family Foundation and the Family Foundation Action. Both have X accounts. And that's kind of tends to be the fun stuff. Like, when the legislator makes the offhanded comment and it's kind of like, oh, that's the stuff you might miss otherwise, but it's pretty fun to engage with as well. So there's just a host of ways that you can step into this. And the last way, and this is, for a lot of folks, this is the harder version of engagement, but it's coming down for our advocacy days. We have a couple of key days during session where we ask people to actually show up. And the reason is because then legislators see in force by volume that there's a lot of people that care about these issues we're out there fighting for. And so it gives them this visual picture. And it really is not just when you send a legislator an email, you're affecting your one legislator. When you come with a massive group, everybody can't help but notice. So the whole chamber is really seeing, oh gosh, there's all these people wearing the same button, they care about the same thing. They all cared enough to come down here. So let me tell you the specific couple of days where we're asking folks to say, hey, right now I'm going to block this on my calendar. I'm going to come down for this day. The first one is January 21st, and that is Kids Deserve More Day. So that's the one where we come down and we talk about issues of education opportunity. So we'll get into all the details of what the bills are and all that on a future podcast or as we in these emails. But that day is devoted to really encouraging this idea that every kid deserves an opportunity to go to a school where they're going to best benefit educationally and for their future. And and that shouldn't be decided by income. That should be decided by the parent. And so whether that's, being able to homeschool, whether that's being able to put your child in different private school, whether that's just getting to choose a public school that's not your assigned school, whatever it is, we think kids deserve more. So that's that day. The next one I'm going to mention is Mama Bear Day. This is a lot of fun. This is February 4th. And this is when it's sort of, we call it Mama Bear Day, but it's parental rights. The issues are focused around parental rights. So all the issues that have to do with, we've got one dealing with some, notice around medication, parents actually knowing the medical records of their kids. We've got, so there's some bills we already know that are kind of going to be in that bucket, but parental rights is the key that day. So again, February 4th, Mama Bear Day. And then I'll just mention, this one's a ways out, but it's worth putting on your calendar now. And you're probably wondering, okay, so when's the March for Life? We can't ignore that one. That one's actually going to be on veto session day, which is way, way into April, so April 2nd. But already go ahead and block that off that you plan to come down to the Capitol to talk about the life issues on April 2nd. So any parting words, anything we didn't cover?
Well, I'm just going to reiterate. You made a great point about them being engaged. And there are ways that they can come down. You can come to the General Assembly. Yep. You can speak to the General Assembly. You can speak in committees. You can do it by Zoom. And we'll make sure in our emails that we include those links so that you can do it from the convenience of your home. Or if you can get away from work and go to a quiet office space, you can do it there. But your voice really does matter during session. I think we can't say that enough. We can go in there. We can talk to them like you mentioned. But when y'all speak and they hear the personal experience, that's what really impacts legislators.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah, and you make our work possible. So thank you so much for supporting us and helping us be your eyes and ears at the Capitol. So thank you for supporting us.
All right. Well, we're off to the races. Look forward to engaging with you with the General Assembly over the next session.